What's going on, everybody? Today, I'm going to teach you the basics of a camera. Stay tuned, find out what it is. Roll that intro. All right, guys. So today, I'm going to teach you guys the basics of a camera. And once you know this, you'll be able to pick up any camera and just roll with it. And this is a good skill to have because you're going to have these practices in your mind, and you know that no matter what you do, it's going to affect either one of these three things that I'm about to tell you, or all of them. But all of them combined help create that perfect image. So, what we're going to talk about today is the exposure triangle. And the exposure triangle is pretty much your ISO, your shutter speed, and aperture. And people think photography is hard, but it's really, once you know these principles, it's very, very easy to grasp. So you just have to know what piece of the equation affects what. So what we're going to talk about first is we are going to talk about the shutter speed. And the shutter speed is a good indication on whether if you want to show motion or freeze motion. So there's like different, there's a whole parameter within that. So the slower shutter speed, the more motion that you're going to see. And I wrote a blog about that, and I'll attach that into this video description. So if you want to see more on that in more detail, that blog will be great for that. And the next piece of the triangle is your ISO. And what ISO is how sensitive your camera is to light. So ISO is, yeah, like I just said, the sensitivity to light. So the higher the ISO, the more sensitive it is to light. But there's a caveat to that. If you go too high on your ISO, you start introducing what they call grain into your image, and you don't really. Some people like the look, but yeah, if you want a clean image, you want little to no grain as possible. So let's see, for this camera, this is a Sony a6300, and ISO ranges go from 100 to, natively, it goes to 25,600. And then you can also go to 32 and 51,200. And that's very, very noisy in this instance. But practically, cameras these days, they can practically see almost in pitch black, and they can pick up some detail. But I wouldn't really, like I said, some detail, because I wouldn't really go that high in the ISO, just because you start introducing a lot of like crazy stuff in your image, like colors and grain and things like that. So my ISO range that I tend to shoot, like I said, I'm mostly a studio photographer. So my ISO range usually ranges from 100 to, I would say, like 400 when I'm shooting inside studio, but mainly 100. And when I'm shooting events, you have to push the ISO a little higher. So like I said, I don't really do events, but if I were to do it, I'm prepared for that situation. So ISO goes a little higher, 500. And then you also have to know your camera. Different cameras have better ISO performances. So I usually shoot with the Sony A7R III, and that's my main camera. And I'm not gonna say that the ISO is too great on there, but it's okay. It's decent. It gets the job done. So the next thing I want to talk about is your aperture, and that part is it's pretty much your lens. It's how open you want your lens to be to let the light in to capture that image. So just to review, shutter speed is the length of time you want the image to be taken. So a slower shutter speed is going to be you're going to get more like motion in your image, and then the faster your shutter speed, you're going to be freezing the image that you're taking. ISO is the sensitivity of the light touching the sensor. In digital today, it's the sensor, but in film days, it's the film. So you would get your film, appropriate ISO film for the sensitivity of the light situations you'll be in. So aperture is the opening to let the light in. So you have a wide aperture. That tends to be the lenses that let the most light into the camera, and that's good for when you're in low light situations. You want as much light into the camera as possible. But there is a thing that you have to watch out for when thinking about your aperture, is because when you have it wide open, yes, you're letting a lot of light in, but then you also tend to have shallower depth of field, and that is a good look for some situations, and a lot of situations, like say from far away, if you're focused on one thing in the center, all the other stuff on the outside will fall out of focus if they're on a different focal plane. But that's just kind of the thing that you have to accept with shooting wide open. But like I said, you get a lot of light into the image, and that's a good thing. And let's go, when you stop it down, it's called stopping down or closing the aperture. You got, let's just say 1.8, then you can stop it down to f4. That'll give you more in focus. So like I said, the wider the aperture, the more shallower depth of field. But once you close it down, your focus becomes more sharper. And yeah, so when you go 5, 6 and on, you're getting a larger focal plane. So let's just say 1.8, you're about like that much. So then if you go 5, 6, you're this much. And then F8, you're this much. And then F11, you're this much, and beyond. So what that's good for is, a lot of people, they use the wide open for portraiture, and that's it. What it does is it isolates the subject from the background. And for the wider open, like for my instance, I shoot wider open when I shoot beauty portraits, because I want to show the detail and texture in the makeup and the face. Or if I'm doing hair, I want to show the detail of the hair. And if you're shooting at shallow depth of field, like at 1.8 or something, and you get that eye in focus, then everything else is going to fall out of focus. So that's why stopping down your aperture, or shooting it wide open, kind of affects, it depends on your, pretty much your vision. Yeah, it affects your vision. So if your vision is to have just totally isolate the subject, you're good to go with wide open. And that seems to be a thing these days. And I was on that for a while too, and I still do it when I'm shooting like outdoor portraits and stuff. and sometimes I want to get wider field of view, so, or focus, so I would stop it down. But the thing is with stopping down, like I said, it's an exposure triangle, so you got the ISO, shutter speed, and aperture all affecting. So like I said, they're all going to affect each other. So if you're shooting wide open, you're letting more light, so then you could get away with a smaller ISO, and then your shutter speed, you can match it accordingly. But let's just say you have to stop down. Let's say you're at 1.8, you got to go to f8. You're going to have to let more light into your camera. So you can either do that in two ways. You could raise your ISO, but like I said, if you raise your ISO too high, that's going to let in noise. Or you can reduce your shutter speed. And if you reduce your shutter speed, that's going to pretty much introduce camera shake if you go lower than the recommended shutter speed for what you're trying to shoot. So that's why other tools come into play, like a tripod, if you're doing things like that. But we're not going to talk about that. That's on another video. But yeah, so they all play with each other. Really, to get that perfect image, you just have to balance those out, and that's just something that I can't really tell you that do this and this, because it's a variable. And like when I was in school, I sucked in math, but I understand this variable with ISO, shutter speed, and aperture. So just get out there, play with your settings. You'll have more control over this in manual, and you'll be able to see exactly like how it affects. So that would be, I guess, the assignment for you guys. If you guys are getting into photography and getting into this, just go out and put your camera in manual and just play around. Just go your ISO and crank it up and take a picture and see what it looks like, and then crank it down, see what it looks like, and things like that. Or take a shutter speed, crank it up and take a photo and see what it looks like. And same thing, go fast on your shutter speed, go slow on your shutter speed, see what it looks like. Go wide on your aperture, as wide as it can go. If you have a kit lens like on this camera, it will be at 3.5 to 5.6. This is the 18 to 55 millimeters. So what that means is when it's zoomed in all the way, your aperture can be 3.5 for your, that's the widest your aperture will go up to, and then it'll go up to 5.6, the smallest, when you zoom out. And that's just the nature of these type of lenses. So you're just gonna have to, like I said, play with the other two settings, because when you zoom in, your image is gonna get darker. So you have to compensate for that. So that's pretty much the exposure triangle for this video, and I'll link the blog in the description below, like I said. And so if you like this video and you found it very informative, please comment, like, share, and if you're new here, subscribe. Can't wait to see you guys on the next video. Peace.